Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this session of Rapid Revision in ENT with me, Dr. Vaishnavi. So, first of all, I would appreciate all of you for having given the test in the morning and then attending this discussion in the afternoon. So, let me know first of all, how was your test? And did you find it easy, difficult, or was it moderately easy? So, let me know your thoughts. Like, how did you fare in the test that happened today morning? I personally believe that I had given a mix of, difficult and easy questions. I would say it was a moderate test, not towards a extremely difficult version or a very easy version too. But the topics that I had given were all repeat topics from the previous year FMG exams. So the whole concept of giving this session was, or the test was, to give you an idea of all the previous year topics and give you some different questions which you probably haven't been exposed in the past, so that you develop a rationale, you develop a critical thinking, you know how to approach an exam question. So that was the whole idea of giving you areas of tough questions so that you're just prepared. It was nothing to make you scared or fearful of, but the whole intent was that you get an idea that how do I approach an exam question, how do I think in the exam hall, how do I differentiate right and wrong, how do I narrow down the answers. That was the whole purpose of giving you a little difficult question. So don't curse me if you've seen the question paper and found it difficult. Trust me, you'll thank me later, because I'm sure that this kind of questions will only train your brain to become tough, resilient, so that you can do the exams very, very well. Yes, so moderately difficult options were tricky. I get it. So I'm seeing that some of you have given that, feedback that the question paper was moderately difficult. I agree. I'm not disagreeing. But do you feel that the topics were all the previous year topics, and we've discussed this multiple times during our, main videos, during the rapid revision videos? We've made a discussion on all of these topics prior. So topics are the same. It's just that we've twisted the questions a bit so that you get an idea. I have given appropriate number of questions, whether it is ear, nose, pharynx, and larynx, because in pharynx we have 6 main chapters. We have anatomy, we have pharyngeal spaces and abscesses, we have tonsil adenoid, we have JNA NPC, and then we have got Ludwig's and pharyngeal pouch. So 6, 7 topics are the ones which are focused on pharynx part of it. So we've had questions from the most important ones. Same goes with the larynx. Ear has 20 chapters, nose has about 15 chapters. So relatively, I had to give you a little more questions so that we practice all the topics for your exams. So don't worry, as we go through the questions now, you will be having a recall of almost entire ENT topics, and this will only prepare you for the best in the exam. So let's start the class now. Yes. So we have the question here where a 25-year-old man with congenital hearing loss is found to have fixation of foot plate of stapes during surgery. Which of the following embryological structure is primarily responsible for the formation of the fixed structure involved? So they've given you such a long question, but it's very, very simple that they have told you one line, which is fixation of foot plate of stapes. So foot plate of stapes embryologically is derived from what? So foot plate of stapes originates from where? So in the middle ear, we have 3 ossicles. We have malleus, we have incus, and then we have got stapes. So malleus and incus will come from the mesoderm of which arch? They will come from the mesoderm of the first arch. Yes, many of you are answering it right, which is option C. So malleus and incus come from the mesoderm of the first embryological arch. Stapes has a suprastructure and footplate. What do I mean by suprastructure? We have a head, we have a neck, anterior and posterior crura like you see, and then this is the footplate. So this entire suprastructure will come from where? It will come from the mesoderm of which arch? From the second arch. And then you have the footplate of stapes. And where is the footplate of stapes coming from? Footplate of stapes is coming from otic capsule. An otic capsule is responsible for the formation of your inner ear structures as well. So C is the right answer. But now I have a quick chart for discussion for all of you so that we revise the embryology quite fast in this session. So if you see, the pinna is coming from where? It is coming from the mesoderm of the first arch mainly, not from second arch completely, partly, but it is mainly from the first arch where you get 6 hillocks which are called as hillocks of His. And from the first hillock, you get the tragus, and rest of the hillocks, you get the rest of the pinna. External auditory canal comes from ectoderm of the first arch cleft. Tympanic membrane comes from all the three layers of the first arch. We have middle ear cleft coming from the pouch, which means the middle ear and the eustachian tube coming from the first and second arch. Malleus incus, stapes, suprastructure, and foot plate we've already discussed. So this completes the embryology part of you and its revision. Now let's go to the second question. The image below shows a joint between two auditory ossicles of the middle ear. Identify the joint and mention the type of synovial joint it is. So if you see here, they have given you a joint, which is your incudo-malleolar joint, and they're asking you what type of joint it is. I think this is a quite old repeat question, simple, easy question. And this we know is a saddle type of joint, and we know head incudostapedial joint is going to be the ball and socket type of joint. So this is ball and socket. And this is going to be your saddle type of joint. Just to ask you, can you tell me there is a muscle that comes and attaches to the neck of malleus? What is this muscle? And there is a muscle coming and attaching to the neck of stapes. What will be this muscle? So quickly put your answers in the chat box. I'm asking you that there's a muscle attaching to the neck of malleus. What will be the name of this muscle? It's going to be your tensor tympani, which is your middle ear muscle. And to the neck of stapes, we have got which muscle? We have got the stapedius muscle. Easy. So I think middle ear muscles, middle ear ossicles is understood. Just to quickly finish the embryology part, tensor tympani is coming from the first arch, stapedius is coming from the second arch. Right. Now let's go to the third question. Which of the following connects scala vestibuli and scala tympani? Is it the helicotrema? Is it the modulus? Is it the cupula? Is it the macula? So let me know if this pace is fine with all of you. If you want me to go a little slower or a little faster, that's fine with me. But I'm just trying to give you the most important information through this session so that we don't end up wasting a lot of time, but yet we cover up the entire subject through this session. Yes. So we know that scala vestibuli and scala tympani are parts of your inner ear, and in the inner ear we have got a central chamber which is called as the vestibule. Anterior to the vestibule we have the cochlea, and posterior to the vestibule we have the semicircular canals, right? In the vestibule there are two recesses, spherical recess and elliptical recess. The spherical recess contains the saccule and the elliptical recess contains the utricle. Can you tell me what is the neurosensory epithelium present in the utricle and saccule in the chat box quickly while I continue my session? So we have cochlea anteriorly. The cochlea is a spiral shaped structure. It takes turn around a central structure called as modulus, around which it makes 2.5 to 2 3/4 turn. So if I see the inner part of the cochlea, I will see that it has three compartments: scala vestibuli, scala media, and scala tympani. Scala vestibuli is separated from the scala media by Reissner's membrane. Very good. And scala media is separated from scala tympani by the basilar membrane. Now, on the basilar membrane, there is a neurosensory epithelium which is responsible for hearing. What is it called as? Yes, in the utricle and saccule, we have got the macula. In the inner ear, in the scala media, we have got the organ of Corti. And in the semicircular canal ducts, in the ampulated end, we have got the crista. Within the crista, we have got the cupula. Right? So now we know what are the structures or what are the terms. Now we need to know what is the communication between scala vestibuli and scala tympani. So this region is the apex of the cochlea, where you have the communication between the scala vestibuli and scala tympani. And what is this called as? This is called as helicotrema. Okay. Scala vestibuli on one end is covered with oval window, which is covered by the foot plate of stapes. Scala tympani on the other end is covered with the round window. Now, this scala tympani is connected to the subarachnoid space containing CSF via a duct called as aqueduct of cochlea. Right? So I hope all of you have understood so far. Yes. So modulus is the central structure. This is the central structure which contains the cochlear artery, cochlear nerve, and the cochlear vein, around which the cochlea, the three compartments, the scala vestibuli, scala tympani, makes 2.5 to 2 3/4 turns. So that central structure around which the cochlea makes turn, that is called as modulus. Okay. So you can see here the anatomy of inner ear. The central chamber is vestibule. It has two recesses, spherical and elliptical recess containing saccule and utricle. Within saccule and utricle, you have got macula. The function of macula is responsible mainly for balance, partly for hearing. Anteriorly, we have got the cochlea, which is responsible only and only for hearing. Posteriorly, we have semicircular canal, which contain crista, and this is responsible only for which motion? Angular motion or rotational motion. For all the other functions of balance, we have got the macula. What is cochlear duct? It is nothing but your scala media. This cochlear duct is connected to the saccule via a duct. This duct, which is connecting the saccule with the cochlear duct, this we call it as ductus reunions, also called as canalis reunions. So it is called as ductus reunions, also called as canalis reunions. Then we have got utricular duct and the saccular duct, which join to form the endolymphatic duct, and this opens into a sac called as the endolymphatic sac. And then there is a bony covering over the endolymphatic duct, and this bony covering is called as vestibular aqueduct. So because we have so many ducts here, you might get confused in the exam. So I am revising this with you. Cochlear duct is nothing but scala media. Ductus reunions connects your saccule with that of the cochlear duct. Saccular duct and utricular duct join to form endolymphatic duct. Covering over the endolymphatic duct is your vestibular aqueduct. And semicircular canal ducts open in the utricle. And this is your vestibular aqueduct. We've already seen what is cochlear aqueduct. It is connecting the scala tympani to the subarachnoid space. So hopefully inner ear is revised with all of you. Quickly give me thumbs up if you're all following me. Yes or no? Okay, let's do the next question. During wax removal, the instrument meets resistance about 6 mm from the tympanic membrane at the narrowest portion of the external auditory canal. What is this region called as? The bony part of the external auditory canal, cartilaginous part, isthmus, or the annulus? So just tell me the answer, just a second. So I see that most of you are answering it as C. That's absolutely right. The narrowest portion of the external auditory canal is your isthmus. What is the importance of isthmus? The importance of isthmus is it is the narrowest portion of the external auditory canal. And what could happen here? Wax or foreign body may be impacted in the isthmus of the external auditory canal. Now, if they give you a clinical scenario that if there's a wax or foreign body that's impacted in the isthmus of the external auditory canal, and if you have to remove this in a child, will you use LA or will you use GA? And in adults, will you use LA or will you use GA? This is my question to all of you. So answer in the chat box. What do you think? See, since it's the narrowest portion, it is just 6 mm lateral from the tympanic membranes. It is that close to the tympanic membrane. So in child, you are going to use GA or short anesthesia with sedation, and in adults you're going to use local anesthesia, because in children they're going to cry, they're going to move local anesthetic. Even if it works, the child is not going to be cooperative, and that can result in perforation. In adults you can use LA. You'll use some magnification device like endoscope or microscope to remove the foreign body or wax. Now, let's assume that there is a patient who has a traumatic perforation. You are trying to remove, आप निकालने की कोशिश कर रहे थे और निकालते निकालते by chance you accidentally hit the tympanic membrane and there was a perforation. Now, what are you going to do? उसके बाद क्या करने वाले हो? Are you going to repair the tympanic membrane, or are you going to wait and watch for at least 6 to 12 weeks before performing the procedure? So let me know what is your answer, because this is one of the PYQs. Exact same question, I think, has come in 22 or 23. I'm not very sure about it, but this is a PYQ. If there's a traumatic perforation of the eardrum, the next step will be myringoplasty, tympanoplasty, wait and watch. What is the next step? All of you are absolutely right. You're going to wait and watch maximum for a period of 12 weeks, or agar 12 weeks ke baad bhi, if there is a perforation persisting, then the surgery of choice will be myringoplasty, where you repair the tympanic membrane. Okay? Got it? And the most important thing whenever you have a traumatic perforation is you are going to ask the patient to keep ear dry. Because agar kaan mein pani gaya, even ear drops, because most patients go to the local pharmacy and they take ear drops, and agar ear drops bhi dala, then the patient's perforation won't heal. And as a result, the patient will have to undergo surgery, which is why you're going to ask the patient to keep the ear dry. Now coming to external auditory canal, can you tell me what are the questions here? What is the total length? Answer in the chat box. How much is the bony part? How much is the cartilaginous part? Which is outer, which is inner? Yes, I'm waiting for your answer. Which part is cartilaginous? Which part is bony? So total length is 24 mm. It is an S-shaped canal. It is not a straight canal. The bony part is medial part or inner part, accounting for 1/3 or 2/3. Medial part, 2/3. Outer part is cartilaginous, which is the lateral part, which is 1/3. So bony part is 16 mm and cartilaginous part is 8 mm. Now there are two communications, one in the cartilaginous part of the canal and the second one in the bony part of the canal, which cause to and fro infections to the parotid gland. What is this in the cartilaginous part called as? Fissure of what? Fissure of, very good, Santorini. And the bony part, what is the communication called as? Foramen of Hashke. This will cause to and fro infections from the parotid gland. And when do these communications close or disappear? These communications usually will close or disappear by 5 years of age. They may persist in some, but mostly by 5 years of age they disappear. Now, if you want to examine the tympanic membrane in adults, how will you pull the pinna? Upwards, backwards, and outwards. And in children, how are you going to maneuver? You're going to just pull it downwards and backwards. So these are all the important points in relation to your external auditory canal. The external ear ho gaya, middle ear ho gaya, embryology ho gaya, inner ear ho gaya. So now let's go to the next question. A 28-year-old man presents to you with painful swelling and redness of the pinna following ear piercing through the cartilage. On examination, the findings are shown in the image. Identify the most likely diagnosis. Is it cellulitis, perichondritis, subperichondral hematoma, or is it furunculosis of the external auditory canal? Yes. So if you see, most of you have already given me the right answer, which is perichondritis. Why are we saying perichondritis? Because I'm sure most of you are seeing that there is something that we call it as sparing of lobule. Or agar sparing of lobule hai, then we know that this is an area that does not have cartilage, which means that there is an infection of the cartilage and the cause is perichondritis. So whenever you get a red, stiff, painful pinna with sparing of lobule, you should think of perichondritis. And what is the organism? Most commonly, the organism is Pseudomonas. And why am I telling this? Because in ENT, most organisms are Streptococcus, but here in perichondritis, we see that the organism is Pseudomonas. Okay? Perichondritis is different. Cauliflower ear occurs secondary to boxer's ear. So whenever there is boxing, there could be hematoma. And whenever the hematoma gets infected, then it can cause necrosis of the cartilage. Necrosis of the cartilage के वजह से there will be a deformity. उसको हम कहते हैं cauliflower ear. Got it? Yes. Now let me ask you some question. What is this prominent projection? Now exam में अगर कोई image based question आए और पूछा ये क्या है? Answer in the chat box. What is this first projection that you see? The second one is here. What is this called as in blue? The first one that we saw was helix. Very good. In the blue it is anti-helix. What is this triangular projection that you see here? Isko kya kehte hain? Tragus. Very important here. Whenever you press the tragus and if the patient winces, pain ho raha hai, that is called as tragal sign. So tragal sign is positive in which condition? It is positive in furunculosis or otitis externa. This is all that I want you to remember. Okay? And what is this space between the helix and tragus? What do you call this as? This space is called as incisura terminalis. And what is incisura terminalis famous for? Again, that it does not have cartilage. So usme hum kya karte hain? We'll take an incision. And what is the name of the incision? We call it as Lempert's end oral incision. So what is the name of the incision? It is called as Lempert's end oral incision. Okay? Done. So all about pinna, canal, revision ho gaya. Chalo. Now quickly about the nerve supply, क्योंकि यहाँ से also you get a lot MCQs. If they ask you lower portion of the pinna is supplied by which nerve? We have given a mnemonic. What was the mnemonic? Lag 7 and 10. So the lower part of the pinna is supplied by which nerve? It's going to be your greater auricular nerve. Okay, so this portion is going to be by which nerve? Greater auricular nerve. Now we have got upper portion of the pinna anteriorly, A for A. A is by which nerve? Auriculotemporal nerve. So anteriorly upper portion is supplied by which nerve? Auriculotemporal nerve. And very less portion of the pinna, very less portion of the pinna is supplied by which nerve? It is via lesser occipital nerve. Okay, these are the three nerves that you should know. Now, this region of concha, this is the region of concha and the retroauricular groove. So, this region of concha and retroauricular groove are supplied by which nerve? Seventh nerve and 10th nerve. Seventh nerve ka kaunsa fibers? Is it the sensory fibers or motor fibers? It is the sensory fibers of the seventh nerve. And 10th ka, we call it as auricular branch of the vagus nerve, also called as Arnold's nerve. Okay? So this is the nerve supply of the pinna. If I ask you nerve supply of the external auditory canal, what will your answer be? Anterior wall and roof is supplied by what nerve? Quickly answer in the chat box. Anterior wall and roof is supplied by which nerve? I'm waiting for your answers. And what about the posterior wall and floor? This is supplied by which nerve? सी एंटीरियरली ऑरिकुलोटेम्पोरल नर्व है ना, यही कैनाल में कंटिन्यू करेगा, है ना. सो एंटीरियरली एंड रूफ इज सप्लाइड बाय ऑरिकुलोटेम्पोरल नर्व and the posterior wall and floor is supplied by Arnold's nerve. Again ये PYQ बहुत बार आता है that while removing wax, while removing foreign body, a patient had cough reflex, the patient had vasovagal attack. This is mediated via which nerve? It is via the Arnold's nerve, which is auricular branch of the vagus nerve that is responsible for cough reflex. It is also responsible for vasovagal attack. Both these nerves end by supplying the outer part of the tympanic membrane. Now middle ear का भी पढ़ लेते हैं, ऐसे आ गए हम nerve supply. तो middle ear is supplied by ninth nerve. That tympanic branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve, we call it as Jacobson's nerve. So what is it called as? Jacobson's nerve. So pinna, canal, tympanic membrane, middle ear, all the nerve supply done? Yes. Now let's go to the next question. During cortical mastoidectomy, while marking the Mac-Evans triangle, the imaginary line across the posterior canal wall was not identified. Injury may result in injury to facial nerve, incomplete clearance of the mastoid air cells, damage to the mastoid antrum, CSF leak from tegmen tympani. I'm again waiting for your answers in the chat box. Yes, come on guys, quickly answer in the chat box. So during a cortical mastoidectomy, what is the main step? We have to do the Mac-Evans triangle as the surface marking. क्यों करना है? Because we want to identify the largest air cell in the mastoid, which is the mastoid antrum. है ना? You're only seeing Mac-Evans triangle and you're answering this. है ना? All of you are doing the same mistake that I see. So if you see the Mac-Evans triangle, what are the three landmarks? This bone here is called as, this elevation is called as सुप्रामास्टोइड क्रेस्ट. इसको क्या कहते हैं? सुप्रामास्टोइड क्रेस्ट. इसका सिग्निफिकेंस क्या है? जब हम ड्रिल कर रहे हैं, when we drill this mastoid bone to go inside, what will happen if you go above this line? You will go in the middle cranial fossa. तो इसीलिए ये लाइन से नीचे रहना है. So what does this represent? Supramastoid crest is a surface landmark for tegmen mastoidi, which indicates that यहाँ पे ड्यूरा होता है और इसके ऊपर we should not go. And if you go or if you go above this line, you will get CSF leak and of course temporal lobe injury. What does this line indicate? The second line across the posterior wall of external auditory canal. ये external auditory canal है. This is the anterior wall. This is the posterior wall. So we know that a nerve goes from the medial wall of the middle ear to the posterior wall. What is this nerve? It is your facial nerve. So if you don't identify the facial nerve, what will happen on this line? You're going to traumatize the facial nerve. So the line across the posterior canal wall represents your facial nerve. If there is a tangential line drawn to these two lines, what does that represent? This represents the sigmoid sinus. So यहाँ पे we have the sigmoid sinus which drains into the internal jugular vein. So if you traumatize or if you go behind this line, you will traumatize the sigmoid sinus. So question is not asking you only Mac-Evans triangle. Question is asking you in Mac-Evans triangle across the posterior canal wall. तो posterior canal wall पे कौन सा nerve होता है? facial nerve. So agar if you don't identify, if you're not identifying it, what will the injury result in? To facial nerve. If the question was asked to you in a different format, supramastoid crest was not identified, then what would your answer be? Now I want all of you to answer in the chat box. If the supramastoid crest is not identified, what will happen? Quick, quick, quick. We have lots to do. Quick answers in the chat box, please. So if you don't identify the supramastoid crest, what will happen? If they would have changed this from posterior canal wall to supramastoid crest, what would your answer be then? Then your answer would be that there is CSF leak from tegmen tympani. Correct? Correct. All of you are now right. Now, when will there be incomplete clearance of disease from the mastoid air cells? Whenever there is a corner septum. What is corner septum? It is persistent with suture. It is persistent petrosquamous suture. So, agar petrosquamous suture persistent hai, and if you are not able to clear that suture line, then it will cause incomplete clearance of the disease. So, Mac-Evans triangle ka concept or corner septum ka concept, everyone is clear? Quickly give me thumbs up if you're all clear with this. Yes, now let's go to the next question. A 6-month-old baby with severe bilateral hearing loss on otoacoustic emission is sent for confirmatory testing. मतलब बोल रहे हैं कि otoacoustic emission में hearing loss है and now the child is sent for confirmatory testing. Which of the following tests will help in determining the lesion along the auditory pathway? तो बहुत simple है. We have done this multiple times. Yes, very, very good. So the screening, here we have to remember that this is also PYQ. Whenever they ask you screening investigation of choice in neonates, it's going to be otoacoustic emission and the confirmatory test is going to be BERA. BERA में कितने waves आते हैं? Any one of you? How many waves do we see on BERA? We ideally see 7 waves. It could be somewhere between 5 to 7 waves and each wave represents one part of the auditory pathway. What is the mnemonic for your BERA findings? What does each wave represents? Let's do it. It is called as E. coli. Okay, so what is it called as? E. coli. What does wave 1 come from? Wave 1 comes from the distal part of 8th nerve. Wave 2 comes from proximal part of 8th nerve. Hai na? Then we have got wave 3 coming from where? It is coming from your cochlear nucleus. Wave 4 comes from olivary complex. Wave 5 comes from lateral lemniscus. 6th and 7th come from inferior colliculus. Correct? Now in BERA, is the child made to be awake or is the child made to sleep? The child has to be asleep. Then only you can do the BERA, and it is the confirmatory test for hearing loss in infants, and it is identifying your entire retrocochlear pathway so that we can identify where exactly is the lesion. Yes, now let's go to the next one. A 22-year-old patient has a lesion involving the primary auditory cortex on the left side. What is the expected deficit? Will there be complete deficit in the left ear? Will there be complete deficit in the right ear? Will there be partial impairment of hearing more on the right side? Partial impairment of hearing more on the left side? Okay, I'll tell you that there is partial impairment because only one auditory cortex or the primary auditory cortex is involved on the left side. Why should there be complete deafness? Complete deafness तो automatically ruled out हो गया, है ना? अब हमारे पास है C and D के बीच में. So we know that the auditory cortex, the primary auditory cortex receives its innervation from the contralateral side. It does receive innervation from the ipsilateral side also, but the main fibers come from the contralateral side. So there will be partial impairment of hearing, more on which side? On the right side. So option C is your right answer. So primary auditory cortex receives bilateral input from both the ears because of multiple decussations. In unilateral lesions, it does not cause complete deafness, that we know. It will cause bilateral impairment of hearing, more so in which ear? More so in the contralateral ear. Okay? Chalo. The ratio of effective area of tympanic membrane to the stapes foot plate is how much approximately? So I want you all to answer this question. This is the ratio which we call it as aerial ratio. So in middle ear, we have two mechanisms by which the sound is transformed. उसको हम क्या कहते हैं? It's called as middle ear transformer action. So in middle ear transformer action, we have got two ratios. We take aerial ratio. The second one we call it as lever ratio. And then we have got total ratio. Correct. How much is aerial ratio? It is the effective vibratory area of the tympanic membrane, which is 45, divided by foot plate area, which is 3.2. And 45 by 3.2, how much do you get? 14:1. So option B, like all of you have given me, that's right. Lever ratio is absolutely right, which is 1.3:1. And how much will be the total transformer ratio? You have to multiply 14 into 1.3, which is approximately going to be 18 times. So these numbers are probably very, very important for your middle ear transformer action. And now once the middle ear transforms the sound and sends it to the inner ear, you already know the mnemonic. It goes via the auditory pathway, which is E. coli ma. Correct. For Bera, it is E. coli. For your auditory pathway, it is going to be E. coli ma. Okay. Yes, we will be giving you the annotated PDF at the end of the session. So don't worry about it. You will get it for sure. Okay, so how much is the effective vibratory area? 45. It could be 55 also. So if you do 45 by 3.2, you get 14. If you do 55 by 3.2, you get 17. Lever ratio is 1.3. So 14 into 1.3 gives you 18:1. 17 into 1.3 gives you 22:1. Okay. A patient presents to you with severe unilateral hearing loss. So they're saying severe unilateral SNHL. On performing Rinne's test on the affected ear, the results appear negative. See, in SN loss, why should Rinne be negative? This finding is mostly due to, you have to now answer a concept. They have given you a scenario and they're expecting you to answer the concept behind this. Is this the true negative Rinne? In SNHL, do we ever get Rinne negative? Yes. Some of you are answering it as A. That's wrong because whenever we say Rinne positive, there are two findings. Either the patient is normal or the patient is having SNHL. Whenever we say Rinne negative, then the patient is having conductive hearing loss. These are the normal findings. In Rinne, we get a condition which is called as false negative Rinne. Where do we get the false negative Rinne? We get this false negative Rinne in unilateral severe to profound SNHL. Okay, so whenever on one ear we have severe, what is the meaning of severe? 70 से 90 decibel तक अगर किसी को hearing loss है, 70 से कम होगा तो this mechanism won't work, नहीं होगा, तब you'll get Rinne positive only. But अगर एक कान में there is 70 to 90 decibel of hearing loss, which is severe to profound hearing loss, then we get false negative. Why is this happening? This is happening because of cross conduction to the opposite ear. What do I mean by that? On one side you have normal hearing, the other side there is SNHL, which is severe to profound. मतलब cochlea के पास more than 70 to 90 decibel hearing loss है. Okay, I'm not saying mild moderate, I'm saying how much? Severe to profound SNHL है. So when I do air conduction, will the sound be heard by the ipsilateral cochlea? No. So AC is not heard. When I do bone conduction, from the ipsilateral cochlea, will it sound be heard? No. But will the sound go via the bones of your skull to the opposite side? And when they go to the opposite side, which is normal, can it be relayed to the brain? Yes. So is BC heard? Not completely, at least better than AC? Yes. So BC is heard and AC is not heard. And whenever AC is less than BC, we say that it is Rinne negative. And why is this happening? Because of cross conduction of sounds towards the normal ear. So can we use this concept for bilateral or for unilateral? Only for unilateral SNHL, which is severe to profound. Otherwise, we cannot use this concept. So this is because of cross hearing through bone conduction to opposite ear. So the whole reason of putting up this is for you to understand what is Rinne positive, what is Rinne negative, where do you get false negative Rinne. Now quickly tell me in the chat box, what is Weber normally? What happens in conductive hearing loss? What happens in sensory neural hearing loss? Give me your inferences fast in the chat box. You can use short words or short alphabets to tell me. And also tell me, when do you use an absolute bone conduction test? It is for testing which pathology? Yes. So normally there will be equal distribution of sound. So if I keep a tuning fork in the midline, the patient will hear equally on both the sides. In conductive hearing loss, the sound will go towards the diseased ear, and in sensory neural hearing loss, it will go towards the normal ear or opposite ear. So Rene done, Weber done. When do you do absolute bone conduction test? It is absolute bone conduction. The sound is being transmitted only through bone. So it is for which pathology? Only for sensory neural hearing loss. And last but not the least, I have already given you these formulas in your sessions. What is AC? AC is equal to conductive pathway plus sensory neural pathway. BC is equal to sensory neural pathway. So this much concept I expect you all to know and revise for your exams. So if it's going so far well with all of you, quickly give me a thumbs up. Yes, going well. Okay, a 45-year-old man complains of difficulty in understanding speech, especially on phone. Pure tone audiometry shows mild SNHL, but his speech discrimination score is poor compared to degree of hearing loss. What is the most likely diagnosis? How many of you think that you also have a suffering like this, that you're not able to understand the speech on phone? बिकॉज बहुत बारी होता है ना, जब हम लोग पढ़ते रहते हैं, वी ट्राई टू एट्रीब्यूट जो भी पढ़ रहे हैं टू आवर सेल्स, दैट ये डिसीज मुझे भी है, अगर हेडेक है तो आई ऑल्सो हैव प्रोबेबली दिस डिसीज, इफ आई हैव हियरिंग लॉस आई ऑल्सो हैव दिस डिसीज. Many a times it happens with us, right? Yes or no? Yes, I guess so. But at least for me, I feel that on phone, I'm not able to really understand, the discriminatory part of the speech. But that doesn't mean I have a disease. I'm normal. In some patients, there could be. But in this patient, the patient is having difficulty in understanding the speech with a speech discrimination score, which is poor. My discrimination score is good. Correct. Now, this patient is having SNHL. So, agar SNHL hai, to can this disease be otosclerosis? No, because in otosclerosis, most commonly there is conductive hearing loss. Correct. So that's ruled out. Now, presbyacusis, acoustic neuroma, and Meniere's disease. Presbyacusis and Meniere's disease, both of them are cochlear pathologies. And in such situations, the speech discrimination score is good. So these are not the answers. Whenever you think of speech discrimination is poor, you have to think of retrocochlear pathology. So tell me, which is the retrocochlear pathology that you see here? It is acoustic neuroma. Whenever you get the word poor speech discrimination, you have to think of retrocochlear. External ear, middle ear, inner ear नहीं है. E. colyma में कहीं पे भी problem हो सकता है. Okay, so this word is your keyword that remember whenever you see that speech discrimination is poor, please remember it is retrocochlear pathology, right? Chalo. A 40-year-old woman, we'll have discussion on acoustic neuroma. I have one more MCQ where I'm going to discuss in detail about it. So right now we'll just move on to the next question. Okay? Okay. So a 40-year-old woman presents to you with sudden onset right-sided hearing loss, which she noticed on waking up how many days ago? 2 days ago. She denies vertigo and otoscopy is normal. So it means there is no external ear disease, neither tympanic membrane disease, neither middle ear disease. And tuning fork test is showing to SN loss. Pure tone audiogram shows 40 decibel hearing loss in 3 contagious frequencies. Which of the following statements regarding management and prognosis is most accurate? First, tell me what is your diagnosis? What are you thinking of? What are you thinking of? What is your diagnosis in this case? A patient presenting to you with unilateral hearing loss, which is SNHL, which is more than 30 decibel in 3 consecutive frequencies in less than 3 days duration. What will we call it as? This we call it as sudden sensory neural hearing loss. What do we call it as? Sudden SNHL. And this, for you all, it's an emergency. So this is an emergency that we see in ENT. So a patient having unilateral SNHL, which is of more than 30 decibel in 3 consecutive frequencies, and the duration of disease is less than 3 days, then you should think of sudden SNHL, sudden sensory neural hearing loss. So in sudden sensory neural hearing loss, the earlier the diagnosis, the better is the recovery, and earlier the treatment, the better is the recovery. So what is the treatment that we give? Most often it is idiopathic. There is no specific cause attributed. So oral steroids and intratympanic steroids should be started as early as possible to get the best outcome. Should you decompress cochlea for a sudden hearing loss? No. Recovery is better, or if it is associated with vertigo? No. Recovery is worse. So if a patient comes to you with sudden SNHL and has vertigo or tinnitus, then you can tell that the prognosis for such a patient is going to be poor. And intratympanic steroids are contraindicated or indicated? They are indicated. So this is also wrong statement. So what is the correct statement? Oral corticosteroids and intratympanic steroids. ITS is for intratympanic steroids. Okay, and this is often unilateral. Again, bilateral, if you have, the recovery is going to be worse. So unilateral hearing loss, idiopathic, then you're going to have a good prognosis. So the correct answer is option A. So sudden SNHL, all of you got it? Any doubt regarding it? You should know what is the definition of it. How do you diagnose? You're going to do an audiogram where there is going to be 30 decibel hearing loss in 3 consecutive frequency and the duration is less than 3 days. It's an emergency. Start of oral steroid, prednisolone, 1 milligram per kg body weight. Intratympanic steroids in the middle ear, you can inject steroids that can be given, which is dexamethasone or methylprednisolone. They won't ask you all of that, but intratympanic and systemic steroids, and which will have good prognosis if it is not associated with vertigo, no tinnitus and unilateral. Okay? Chalo. Which of the following is a subjective test for hearing? Subjective means the patient is giving the response. Now again, this is a commonly tested topic in ENT. Subjective test, objective test, screening test, confirmatory test. ये बार-बार पूछते हैं. So which is a subjective test? Yes. BERA is a machine generated report. Just now you saw babies asleep, multiple electrodes are kept. So it is a subjective test or an objective test? Definitely this is an objective test. Otoacoustic emission again is a machine generated report which will say emissions are present or absent. So again, this is going to be an objective test. What is tone decay test? Yes, most of you are giving me the right answer. Tone decay test is I vibrate a tuning fork and I will keep it near the pinna. And I'll ask the patient to report to me when the patient stops to hear the sound. Normally, you, me, and everyone, we can hear the sound at least for 1 minute and more. But if the patient is hearing for lesser duration, it means that the patient is having retrocochlear pathology. So who is giving response? Patient. I'm able to hear and not able to hear. Less than 60 seconds or more than 60 seconds. So it's a subjective test. Auditory steady state response again is a machine generated report. It is like EEG where we study the electrical activity in the brain on giving sound stimulation. So it is again an objective test. So the subjective test is tone decay test. So if you see here, we have this test which are subjective and objective test. Very, very important because you have a lot of FMG PYQs coming in from here. Subjective test, tuning fork test we have revised. I'll give you a quick revision of audiometry also now. ABLB and SISI. What is ABLB and SISI? Alternate binaural loudness balance test and short increment sensitivity index. These are the tests for recruitment. And what is the importance of recruitment? It indicates which pathology? Cochlear pathology. And tone decay test, it indicates retrocochlear pathology. So if I ask you what is the subjective test indicating cochlear pathology, answer has to be ABLB or SISI. If I ask you objective test for cochlear pathology, then it is going to be otoacoustic emission. So objective test for cochlear pathology is otoacoustic emission, and for retrocochlear pathology, it is going to be BERA. Tympanometry is for middle ear diseases. Stapedial reflex again tests your retrocochlear pathology. Electrocochleography measures the electrical potentials of the cochlea. Okay, so do you all want me to quickly revise the audiograms? If yes, let me know in the chat box. Audiogram, tympanometry, do you want to ask me to revise right now? If yes, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go forward to the next question. Yes? Okay. So whenever we have an audiogram, we have two curves, AC and BC. Right ear is always depicted in red and left ear is always depicted in blue. 0 is a symbol for air conduction, X is a symbol for air conduction, lesser than and greater than are symbols for bone conduction. So right now I won't do the symbols, I'll just do the graph. So if you say this is your AC curve and this is your BC curve. Okay, let's say this is 0, 0, 0, 0. This is less than, less than, less than, less than, indicating BC at various frequency 250, 500, 1K, 2K. If they are between 0 to 20, is this normal or abnormal? Quickly let me know in the chat box while I draw the next one. Is that normal or abnormal? Yes, this is a normal graph. Now look at this graph. BC curve is between 0 to 20. But look at AC curve. Where is AC curve? Is it between 0 to 20 or has it gone below? And is there a AB gap? What does this signify? Such a graph indicates what? I'm waiting for your answers. Yes, so this is suggestive to you of conductive hearing loss where the BC is in the normal range and AC is in the abnormal range and there is an airborne gap. Then we say that there is a conductive hearing loss. Now, if BC and AC both are in the abnormal range, they have come down, then what does it indicate? And there is no AB gap. And even if it is there, it is less than 20 decibel. What does it indicate? Yes, this is indicating to you SNHL. If you get a BC and AC which is downsloping, where do you get such a downsloping graph? In which condition? Yes, downsloping is seen in presbyacusis. Where do you get an upsloping type of a graph? Patel, for AC and BC graph in conductive hearing loss, it is said to be significant if the gap is more than 20 decibel. So if BC is at 0 and AC is at 30, the gap is 30 dB, right? That is more than 20, which is why it is significant. So the AB gap has to be more than 20 decibel to say it is significant, right? Yes. So upsloping is seen in which condition? Meniere's disease. Now, if we get a SNHL where there is a dip at 4000 hertz, what will we call it as? Quick. Dip at 4000 hertz in both AC and BC. We call it as boiler's notch, also called as acoustic dip, seen in which condition? Noise induced hearing loss, Piyush. Okay, but if you see a dip at 2000 hertz, only in BC, we call it as Gerhardt's notch. And where do you get Gerhardt's notch? Otosclerosis. Got it? So all of you are very clear about the audiograms now. Let's quickly do the tympanometry also. What is A type of graph? Where do you get AS? Where you get AD? Where do you get B? And where do you get C? Quickly answer in the chat box. We have already seen these graphs. A is seen as normal. S is for sclerosis. It is seen in otosclerosis. D is for ossicular discontinuity. Very good. B is seen whenever there is a fluid in the middle ear and C whenever there is a eustachian tubal dysfunction. So ho gaya hearing loss, Rinne, Weber, absolute bone conduction, audiometry, tympanometry, recruitment, tone decay, cochlear, retrocochlear pathology, subjective, objective test. Sab revision ho gaya, 2 slide, 2 question mein. All of you? Yes, happy about it? Now you're feeling a little confident? Okay, let's go to the next question then. A 42-year-old man presents with gradual unilateral hearing loss. He says soft sounds are hard to hear, but loud sounds are uncomfortably loud. What is this phenomenon where there is excessive growth in the intensity of sound? On CISI, the value is 80%. Tone decay test is negative, which means we are ruling out some pathology. Where is the likely lesion? See, when tone decay test is negative, tone decay test positive, we have seen it as retrocochlear pathology. But here it is clearly saying tone decay test is negative. So if tone decay test is negative, what are we ruling out? We are ruling out retrocochlear lesion. So ये तो निकल गया हमारे option से. Is central auditory lesion also ruled out? Yes. Now they're telling to you that the patient is having CISI positive. What is CISI? Short increment sensitivity index, which means that when you give a tone to the patient and you increase and decrease by 1 or 2 decibel, normally you and me can't appreciate that small 40 ka 41 kab hua, 40 kab hua, 50 ka 51 kab hua. We can't appreciate that 1 or 2 dB change. But those who have recruitment, what is recruitment? Abnormal growth in the intensity of sound. Then it indicates that the lesion is at what level? It is at the cochlear level, where your CC will be positive. What is positive? More than 80% is positive. What is normal? 0 to 20 is normal. So now we know that where is the lesion? It is at cochlea. Okay? Everyone is clear about it? Okay, let's go to the next question. In acute mastoiditis, the first radiological change seen on X-ray is clouding of the mastoid air cells, destruction of the bony septa, coalescence of the mastoid air cells, formation of subperiosteal abscess. See, all these signs can be seen on the X-ray or on the CT scan of a patient who has acute mastoiditis. है ना? सारे findings हो सकते हैं, but they're asking you what is the first radiological finding. Very good, all if you're answering it right, which is clouding of the mastoid air cells. So if you see here, I have a CT scan of a patient. If you see that this is the mastoid air cells of the normal side, this is the mastoid air cells of the disease side. Normally, you'll see these air pockets present here, right? Between the septa. मतलब एक सेप्टा और दूसरे सेल के बीच में एयर पॉकेट्स है जो ब्लैक दिखाई दे रहा है. बट इफ यू सी द अदर साइड देयर आर सेप्टेशंस बट बिटवीन द सेल्स इट इज हेजी. This we call it as clouding of the mastoid air cells, which is the first sign. Ab मान लो the septa are destroyed. What will happen? All the air cells together will coalesce to form what? They'll form coalescent mastoiditis. So clouding eventually can lead to destruction of septa. And if there is destruction of septa, what will it lead in? It will result in coalescent mastoiditis. And eventually this pus which is there inside the mastoid air cells can erode and form an abscess which is called as subperiosteal abscess. Okay, and the most common location is behind the auricle. So the most common is which one? It is your post-auricular abscess. Okay? Everyone is clear so far how the disease is progressing. Now my question to all of you is, if the pus trickles from the tip of the mastoid into sternocleidomastoid muscle, what is the name of the abscess? If it goes into the digastric muscle, what is the name of the abscess? If it goes into the external auditory canal, then what is the name of the abscess? So the most common we saw was post-auricular. The most common, very, very good. I see all of you are answering it absolutely right. The most common is post-auricular. If the pus trickles down in the sternocleidomastoid, we call it as Bezold's abscess. So Bezold's is sternocleidomastoid. If it goes in the digastric or in the canal, we name it as Sittelli's abscess. So how did we remember? C के बाद आता है D. So Sittelli's abscess is digastric abscess and Lux abscess is going to be your external auditory meatal abscess. So Lux is your meatal abscess. So all the abscesses in relation to mastoid is learned. What are the radiological findings are learned. Now let us quickly revise the signs क्योंकि इसमें बहुत questions आते हैं. First of all, organism responsible for mastoiditis. What is the first sign that you see? And what is the specific sign that you see? And lighthouse sign is seen in which conditions? I want answers for all the 3 questions, which will complete your topic on acute mastoiditis. Yes, quick. What is the first sign where the skin is stretched, it is shiny, it looks like somebody has, pressed it? What do we call it as? Very, very good. This is called as ironed out appearance of the mastoid. This is the first sign. Specific sign. This is again a PYQ asked multiple times. First sign and specific sign. The specific sign that is only seen in mastoiditis is called as reservoir sign. And what is lighthouse sign? There is pulsatile discharge. We have pulsatile otorrhea that reflects light. And this is seen in which two conditions? It is seen in ASOM. It is also seen in acute mastoiditis. Other than that, we see in mastoiditis, there will be sagging of the posterior canal wall. There will be tenderness. The pinna is pushed outwards and forwards. All of those other signs are there, but these are the signs that you should and must know for mastoiditis. Organism is the same as that of ASOM, which is Streptococcus pneumoniae. Okay? Mastoiditis done. Now let's go to the next question. A patient with ASOM complains of deep retroorbital pain, persistent ear discharge, and abducent nerve palsy. This presentation is typical of, I have told you this presentation multiple times, and this is a PYQ also, tested multiple times. Yes. This is seen in petrositis. All of you are absolutely right. In meningitis, there will be headache, neck rigidity. The patient will be irritable. There may be altered sensorium. Those features will be given. In facial nerve palsy, deviation of angle of mouth, that will be there. In brain abscess, features of raised intracranial pressure like headache, projectile vomiting, altered consciousness. And there will be features because of abscess in the certain location of the brain. Like if it is on the motor cortex, there will be hemiplegia. If it is on the auditory cortex, there can be hearing loss. If it is on the speech cortex, there can be aphonia. So depending upon the location of abscess, you can have specific features in brain abscess. Now, what is petrositis? Petrositis is a condition where there is inflammation of the petrous apex. So this leaf-like bone is called as petrous apex. Now, at the level of petrous apex or near medial to it, we have got the brainstem with midbrain, pons, and medulla. Now we have the cranial nerves. Which cranial nerves come from the midbrain? What do we get? Third nerve and fourth nerve. From the pons, which nerves do we get? 5 and 6th, which are very close to the apex of the petrous bone. And then we have 7 and 8 coming, which go in this canal. What is this canal? This canal is called as internal auditory canal. And from medulla, you have got the 9th, 10th, and 11th nerve. Correct. So whenever we have inflammation of the petrous apex, which nerves will be involved? 5 and 6. Because of fifth nerve involvement, ophthalmic division, retroorbital pain. Because of sixth nerve involvement, there will be lateral rectus palsy presenting to you with diplopia. And why is this happening? Because of persistent ear discharge. Correct. Now that we've understood about this triad is called as Grady-Negos triad, which is seen in petrositis. Now let's quickly do the extracranial complications that we see in relation to ASOM and CSOM. Now let's presume this is the area of your middle ear and here is your mastoid. So what is the most common spread of infection from middle ear to mastoid? So if it goes to mastoid, what will happen? Mastoiditis. Very good. From the middle ear, if it goes to the inner ear, what will it result in? Labyrinthitis. Now, which nerve can get involved, which travels through the internal auditory canal, middle ear, and mastoid? What is that nerve? Can you answer in the chat box? Which goes from the internal auditory canal, inner ear, middle ear, and mastoid. What is this nerve? I'm waiting for your answers. Facial nerve. So it can cause facial nerve palsy. And if the infection goes further medially, what will it result in? Petrositis. And if it goes to the squamous temporal bone, osteomyelitis. So now we know all the extracranial complications, which is mastoiditis, labyrinthitis, facial palsy, petrositis, and osteomyelitis. Correct? These are your extracranial complications. Now, can you tell me intracranial complications? Now, let's presume this is the middle ear. And from here, the disease is going superiorly. If there is inflammation of meninges, what will we call it as? Answer in the chat box, guys, quickly. The disease is going from the middle ear to the meninges. What will we call it as? Meningitis. Correct. If there is localization of pus between the bone, which is your tegmen, and the dura above, what will we call it as? Very, very good. It's called as extradural abscess. If it goes between the dura and the brain, what do we call it as? We call it as subdural abscess. Excellent, all of you. And if it goes inside the brain, we call it as brain abscess. And if it goes from middle ear to mastoid, where we have got the sigmoid sinus, it can result in sigmoid sinus thrombosis. or thrombophlebitis. And because of that, there can be raised intracranial pressure, which we call it as otitic hydrocephalus. These are all your intracranial complications. So extracranial, intracranial, I'm going to discuss more, but have you all got a quick revision of all this? We've discussed this multiple times, so I'm not going to go in detail. Only one point, if I have to tell you here to remember, is which one is silent. S for S, silent abscess. If they ask you in exam, it is going to be subdural abscess. So they'll tell you that there is an abscess following CSOM, which is silent, not presenting to you with any major sign or symptom. Is it extradural, subdural, brain abscess, or post-auricular abscess? Then what should your answer be? It should be subdural abscess, because this is also labeled as silent abscess. Okay? That is the one takeaway that I want you to remember as of now. Chalo, we have more questions on complications. We'll do that in a while. Meanwhile, answer this question. A 7-year-old child presents to you with hearing difficulty for the past 3 months. There is no history of ear pain or tear discharge. Child has a history of recurrent cold, mouth breathing, and snoring. Very, very important findings are given here. Only hearing difficulty, no pain discharge, otoscopy showing dull retracted with air fluid level. What is the next best step in the management? Now, they have already told the duration of disease is since 3 months, right? Now, should we do immediately Grome insertion, or should we do adenoidectomy and Grome if effusion persists after 3 months, radical mastoidectomy or reassurance? Now, we know for sure mastoidectomy, so it's not there, because you're talking of what patient we're talking of: SOM, glue ear, non-suppurative otitis media, all of which mean the same. Why am I telling that? Because there is no pain, no discharge. Pain is a feature of ASOM. No pain is a feature of SOM. They have given you features of adenoid hypertrophy here, where they have mentioned to you that there is mouth breathing, snoring. So this indicates adenoid hypertrophy, and this is causing hearing loss. Now, has the patient gone to the doctor? No. Was there a tympanometry done? No. Was the diagnosis of SOM established? No. So we don't know anything about this patient in terms of 3 months, what has happened. Now, randomly the patient can tell it has been there since 3 months, it could have been there since 3 weeks, it could have been there since 6 months. We don't know. So as of now, we know adenoid hypertrophy with SOM is there. So what are we going to do? We will do adenoidectomy with Grome if effusion persists for 3 months of medical therapy. What does that mean? The patient has come to me now. I will evaluate. I'll do tympanometry. I'll give intranasal corticosteroids to reduce the adenoiditis. I'll give decongestants. I'll give mucolytics so that there is drainage of the fluid in the middle ear. And I'll wait for 3 months. After 3 months, I will repeat a tympanometry, which will again show to me B type of tympanogram. Then if it is persisting, then we'll go for adenoidectomy and Grome. If it has resolved, we don't need to do that. So correct answer is option B. So even if you see this word 3 months, don't get jitters and shivers in exam and think that अरे बाप रे 3 months हो गया, अभी करे Grome या नहीं करे या नहीं करे. But पहले treatment दिया था या नहीं दिया था, वो भी तो देखना चाहिए. The patient didn't go, they have not told. If they would have told that there is failure of medical treatment, or if the patient has gone to the doctor and spontaneous resolution has not happened, then you do adenoidectomy Grome immediately. I'll agree. Okay. So they can twist this question, and this question has come to you multiple times, which is why I have told this to you in detail of how to manage. Now, ASOM and SOM both will present in children. What is the discriminating feature? In ASOM, the patient will have pain and fever. In SOM, they have only hearing loss. The key feature that tells us ASOM is cartwheel appearance, or there could be bulging, or there could be perforation, and there could be lighthouse sign. But in SOM, the key feature is air fluid level and air bubbles. Like you see here, there are some air bubbles, right? And a fluid level below and an air level above. In ASOM, we do not investigate. In SOM, the investigation of choice is tympanometry. Of course, we do Rinne, Weber, audiogram, all of that, but the investigation of choice is tympanometry. In both of them, you're going to give medical treatment. Myringotomy is done in ASOM in posterior-inferior quadrant, where you do a curvilinear incision. There are 4 indications, which I am sure all of you know. For SOM, we do myringotomy plus Grome, and with or without adenoidectomy. If they have given you features of adenoid hypertrophy like mouth breathing, snoring, difficulty in sleeping, or the child is restless, the child is having hitched upper lip, the crowding of teeth, high arched palate, all of that is given, then you think of adenoidectomy. Question में वो नहीं दिया गया है, then please don't mark adenoidectomy because SOM can happen even without adenoid hypertrophy. So look for features. अगर features है तो do adenoid, अगर नहीं है तो don't do adenoid. ठीक है? तो ASOM, SOM सबको समझ में आ गया. One chart showing you this much, you revise and go. Your questions will be sorted. Done? Everyone's clear with this? Yes. Kindly give me a thumbs up because then I know that you guys are following with me in the class. I hope it's going well with all of you because I can only see the messages. I don't see your faces to understand if you're following well with me. So thank you, everyone. Yes. A 30-year-old presents to you with foul-smelling ear discharge. Otoscopy shows to you a posterior-superior retraction pocket with the keratin debris. PTA shows 40 decibel conductive hearing loss. What is the treatment of choice? Yes, all of you, thank you so much for your thumbs up. It boosts me up to do much more better in the classes. Yes, so whenever you get a foul smelling ear discharge, blood stained ear discharge with the posterior-superior retraction pocket or an attic retraction pocket. So if I say this is the tympanic membrane, so if we have any attic perforation or retraction, or if we have a posterior-superior perforation or retraction and it is foul smelling and if there is blood stained, it is definitely an unsafe type of a disease. Whether it is CSOM or whether it is cholesteatoma, that's another story. If it is associated with keratin debris, you're going to think of cholesteatoma. If not, you're going to think of unsafe type of CSOM. And in both the cases, what is the treatment of choice? The treatment of choice will be modified radical mastoidectomy. The treatment will not vary. When do we do radical mastoidectomy? It is not practiced nowadays. In radical mastoidectomy, we remove the entire canal, the middle ear, the ossicles, the muscles, the mucosa of the middle ear, the mucosa of the mastoid, and we plug the eustachian tube with fat so that we don't want any aeration in the middle ear. So we're doing radical surgery. That is done for patients with CA, cancer of the middle ear or the temporal bone. Then only we do it. Otherwise, in very, very few patients with CSF otorrhea also we can do that, but indication is CA. So अगर कैंसर नहीं दिया गया है तो radical तो कभी भी नहीं करना है, उसको छोड़ दो. Cortical mastoidectomy is done for a safe disease like acute mastoiditis, or if a patient has chronic CSOM with mastoiditis, then you're going to do a cortical mastoidectomy. There's no role of antibiotics and ear drops for unsafe type of CSOM. Okay? Chalo. So in cholesteatoma, what do we see? Foul smelling ear discharge, hearing loss, and otorrhea. What is the most common site of origin? Can you all tell me what is the most common site of origin? It is the Prusak space. What is Prusak space? The space between pars flaccida and neck of malleus. Most common site of spread. It is to which canal? Lateral semicircular canal. Most common ossicle to be eroded. It is going to be the long process of incus. What is it? It's going to be the long process of incus. Most common site of recurrence, जहां पे recur हो सकता है, that is infrapyramidal recess, which is called as sinus tympani. The investigation of choice is going to be HRCT temporal bone, and definitive treatment is going to be MRM. Okay. Now in cholesteatoma, you can see pars flaccida retraction with keratin flakes. If you see a whitish mass behind the tympanic membrane, then you can think of congenital cholesteatoma. And in congenital cholesteatoma, we should know a name which is called as Levinson's criteria for congenital cholesteatoma, where the patient will have whitish mass behind an intact tympanic membrane, no prior history of ear disease, ear surgery, or any ear pathology. Only positive finding is whitish mass behind an intact tympanic membrane. Okay, so cholesteatoma revision done. Now let's go to the next question. A 25-year-old woman presents to you with mucopurulent ear discharge for past 2 years and hearing loss in the right ear. And otoscopy shows to you a central perforation of pars tensa with mucosal edema, but no cholesteatoma. Audiometry is showing to you conductive hearing loss. What is the best line of management after controlling the infection? So they're telling we are controlling the infection. Next, what will you do? There is perforation in which quadrant? Pars tensa or pars flaccida? If there is a pars tensa perforation, the discharge has been cleared, infection has been controlled. We have to repair the tympanic membrane and the middle ear. So the surgery where you repair the tympanic membrane and the middle ear, meaning you not necessarily that you have to repair the ossicles or you have to repair anything in the middle ear. You just check the middle ear if there is any effusion, discharge, granulation, all of that you clear. That surgery is called as tympanoplasty. So tympanoplasty is repair of what structures? Tympanic membrane and middle ear. Only if they give you that the disease has extended to the mastoid, then you will add mastoidectomy. If they haven't given that, you're not going to do mastoidectomy. Whenever there is a central perforation, it indicates to you a safe disease. So for a safe disease, will you do MRM? Never. It's only done for unsafe disease. Grome insertion is not done for CSOM, it is done for SOM. So even that is not the answer. So now we are very sure that it is tympanoplasty. Now this was a question that came in the FMG 25 examination where some students said that, ma'am, they gave a tympanic membrane pars tensa perforation which was dry, and some said there was discharge. Now, I don't know what was the exact question because there was a ambiguity there. But let's see, if you're given such a question, how do we manage? So if you're given a patient who has dry central perforation, so you see here, this is your pars tensa, this is your perforation, and you can see the middle ear through the perforation. And do you see any pus there? No. So such a dry CP indicates to you a mucosal or a safe or a tubotympanic type of a disease. Okay. And when it is dry, you just have to repair it not immediately, but of course the treatment will be repairing with the help of surgery, which is called as tympanoplasty. Okay. Now you see this one. There is a perforation in the pars tensa, but do you see some pus coming from the middle ear into the canal? Yes. So this is also a tubotympanic or a mucosal type of a disease. The one where it was dry, we call it as inactive. But if you see that there is pus, what will we call it as? Active. So first active के लिए क्या करना होगा? We will have to make the ear dry. How will you make the ear dry? By giving medical treatment, antibiotics, ear drops, oral toileting, all of that. Then what will you do? Then you will do tympanoplasty. So they will give you a question, an image like this, and they'll ask you what is the next step in management. So if it is dry, you can do directly tympanoplasty. If there is an active discharge, make it dry by giving antibiotics, medical treatment first, and then you do tympanoplasty. You can't do a grafting. You can't put a graft in an infected ear. You have to make the ear clean, non-infected, and then only you can put your graft. Okay. And if you see something like this, a pars flaccida retraction with keratin debris or a posterior-superior quadrant, then it is an unsafe disease which would mandate an MRM. Now, both of these two diseases, whether it is inactive or whether it is active, if there is a mastoid involvement, they have given you an X-ray, or if they have given you a CT scan or mentioned a line that mastoid is involved, there is clouding or haziness of the mastoid hair cells, then you will do a mastoidectomy additionally, otherwise not. So now any question that comes on CSOM, will you be able to answer safe type, unsafe type, active, inactive? All of you? Yes or no? I'm waiting for your answers. Yes, thank you so much. A 19-year-old male with lateral sinus thrombosis after unsafe CSOM develops a painful neck swelling along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid and septic emboli in the lung. Which of the following best explain this finding? Is there extension of the thrombus in the internal jugular vein? Is there sigmoid sinus erosion into the middle ear? Is there petrositis, or is it because of cavernous sinus thrombosis? See, they're telling to you that already there is thrombosis. Already diagnosis आपके हाथ में ही है. बोल रहे कि thrombus हुआ है because of unsafe CSOM. उसके साथ साथ अभी पेशेंट को एक नेक स्वेलिंग है अलोंग द एंटीरियर बॉर्डर ऑफ स्टर्नोक्लीडोमास्टोइड. यहाँ पे कौन सा वेन होता है? इट्स वेरी वेरी सिंपल. इवन इफ यू डोंट नो सिग्मोइड साइनस थ्रोम्बोसिस, इट्स फाइन, बट एटलीस्ट डू वी नो दैट हियर वी हैव द इंटरनल जुगुलर वेन, एंड इफ द septic emboli goes into the jugular vein, it can enter the cardiac circulation. From the cardiac circulation, can it also go into the lungs? Yes. So the answer is extension of the thrombus into the internal jugular vein. Sigmoid sinus erosion in the middle ear will only result in bleeding. Bleeding होगा ज्यादा से ज्यादा, but उसके वजह से septic embolia in the lung ये सब नहीं होगा, swelling in the neck नहीं होगा. Petrositis we have already seen, fifth, sixth nerve involvement. Cavernous sinus is nowhere related. Of course, we have the superior sagittal, inferior sagittal, straight and transverse sinus which drains into the sigmoid sinus. तो अगर आप देखो, this is how the sigmoid sinus receives its drainage. This is the transverse sinus which drains in the sigmoid sinus. This sigmoid sinus is present along the posterior border of your mastoid bone, and then from there it drains into the internal jugular vein. So if there is a thrombus, can it release septic emboli in the circulation? Yes. And because of that, can there be fever, which is Pickett-Fens type of fever? Have you read that word? Hectic Pickett-Fens type of fever? Yes. And because there is thrombosis, can the small mastoid emissary veins drain into the sigmoid sinus? No. And because of that, will there be edema and bluish discoloration of mastoid? This can come to you as an IBQ. What is this sign called as? Very, very good, everyone. This is called as Griesinger sign, where there is edema and bluish discoloration of the mastoid. Then you see that because the sigmoid is thrombosed, can the cranial circulation drain into the sigmoid sinus? No. And because of that, will the intracranial pressure be high? Yes. And because of the high intracranial pressure, will we see papilloedema, where there is dilatation of the optic disc? Yes. So there will be papilloedema. These are your buzzwords, which is why I'm trying to tell you. Now, on a contrast enhanced CT or a contrast enhanced MRI, we see a sign. What is this sign called as? Delta sign, also called as MT delta sign. So ये सब आपको revise करना है before the exam. What is the kind of fever? Hectic Pickett-Fens type of fever. What is that edema and bluish discoloration? It is called as Griesinger sign. You will see raised intracranial pressure in terms of papilloedema, delta sign in terms of CT or MRI. So that's about your sigmoid sinus thrombosis. So if you see mastoiditis, petrositis, sigmoid sinus thrombosis, were they all complications of CSOM or ASOM that we've discussed so far? Now let's go to the next complication. A patient with past history of scanty foul-smelling ear discharge presents to you with aphasia and altered sensorium. Otoscopic examination and CECT's finding is given below. So of course, otoscopic examination image is missing. I know that, but let's see the direct image of the CT, which is clinching to the diagnosis. The best management is, you see there's something, ठीक है, you don't know, ये image देखा, पता नहीं था exam में क्या है. Let's think that we have not studied this chapter at all. But if as a student I would go, what would I think of? I'll see this is the anterior cranial fossa. ठीक है, this is your middle cranial fossa and this is your posterior cranial fossa. यहाँ पे कुछ तो दिख रहा है which is in the middle cranial fossa, है ना? Now middle cranial fossa we know is in very close proximity to the ear. So I will think that when they are giving me otoscopic findings, when they are giving me foul smelling discharge, this is some ear disease, probably CSOM या कोलेस्टेटोमा, वो पता नहीं है. उसके बाद कुछ तो हुआ है ब्रेन में, which means that it is an unsafe type of a disease. So what will I think of? This is a brain abscess. So for a brain abscess, it's an emergency. तो abscess को drain करना होगा. How are we going to drain the abscess? By putting a burr hole and drain the abscess and give IV antibiotics. Later, we have to do a surgery after 6 weeks, which is MRM. Will we give only antibiotics and wait for the patient to die because of raised intracranial pressure? No. Will we only excise the abscess capsule so that there will be dissemination of all that pus in the brain? Of course not. And corticosteroids is contraindicated. It can be given as an acute measure to lower the intracranial pressure, but you won't give that as the treatment of choice for patients who have brain abscess. ठीक है? समझ में आ गया? Yes. Now let's go to the next question. A 35-year-old woman presents to you with otosclerosis and she's scheduled for stepidotomy. The surgeon prefers to perform the procedure under local anesthesia instead of general anesthesia. What is the main reason for choosing LA in this surgery? Why do we do Stepy surgery in LA? So this is a learning MCQ. Her MCQ mein I'm telling you, if you were a student, you don't know how to go about it. Now I'm telling you, this is a learning MCQ that you have to learn why is Stepy surgery done in LA, not in GA. Is this because of pain, comfort, and quicker recovery? मतलब LA comfortable है या GA comfortable है? We all know GA is comfortable. So can this be the right option? Never. To reduce intraoperative bleeding, again, bleeding control is better with GA, but I mean, LA maybe we can have a good control by giving local anesthetics with vasoconstrictors, but is that the reason why we do local surgery in stapes? No, that is not the reason. Why are we doing the surgery in otosclerosis under local anesthesia? Because we have to assess intraoperative improvement in hearing, and we want to detect if there is any vertigo or facial palsy. Now, what do we mean by that, ma'am? Why vertigo? Why facial nerve palsy? Let us understand. Now, where are we operating? We are operating on stapes. Where does stapes sit? On which window? Oval window. Oval window covers which compartment of the cochlea? It covers your scala vestibuli. Scala vestibuli contains which fluid? It contains your perilymph. है ना? Now, in stapedectomy or stapedotomy, what are we going to do? We are going to take off this stapes. In stapedectomy, we remove the entire stapes along with that of the foot plate. When I'm removing the stapes with that of the foot plate, can there be perilymph leak because of the tear in the oval window membrane? Yes. And if the perilymph leaks, will the patient have vertigo? Yes. So if there is a perilymph leak, the patient will present to me with vertigo. And if the patient is awake, will the patient tell, ma'am, chakkar aa raha hai? So I know I have done damage to the oval window. I have to repair it. I have to correct the perilymph leak because the patient is also telling to me of vertigo. Okay? That part understood. Second part. If I take the piston, which is communicating now your incus to that of the oval window, if I go too deep, again will the patient tell to me of vertigo? And will the patient have comfort? No. So this can be reported to me intraoperatively. But if I do a piston which is just touching the oval window, then will the patient have a good hearing and no vertigo? Yes. So that 1 mm, 0.1 mm, 0.2 mm also makes a difference in stapes surgery. So assessment of hearing when the piston is just touching the oval window, neither too deep or neither too superficial that it is just hanging above the oval window, we don't want that. Then we won't get optimal results. So we just want it to touch the oval window without going deep and without being superficially hanging. And to understand that, we need the patient to be awake. So we can assess the hearing improvement, which will tell me the piston is of adequate size. It will tell me vertigo assessment, which means that the piston has not gone inside and there is no perilymph leak. And we also know above the oval window lies a nerve. What is the nerve that lies above the oval window? It is your facial nerve. So while doing the surgery, can we accidentally cause trauma to the facial nerve? Yes. And how do we assess? Intraoperatively, if the patient is awake, can I tell the patient to blow the cheek, smile, clench the teeth? Yes. So these things can all be assessed when the patient is awake. That is why stapes surgery is preferably done under LA, not in GA. Okay? Everyone has understood this? 3 reasons: vertigo assessment, hearing assessment, and facial nerve. Okay, somebody is saying that the video is not working. I hope all of you are able to see my video. And if you're not able to see the video, I'd say that log out and log in again. Okay. Yes, so let's go to the next question. We have a 30-year-old woman presenting to us with gradually progressive bilateral hearing loss since 2 years. So 30-year-old bilateral hearing loss, chronic onset, family history is also positive. On examination, normal tympanic membrane. Rinne is negative and there is a dip seen at 2000 hertz. Now, every information that you want is already there. I don't even have to tell you the answer. 30 to 40 years of age, female, past medical history or family history, gradually progressive conductive hearing loss. How do I know conductive hearing loss? Because Rinne is negative, normal tympanic membrane, and a Gerhardt's notch, which is a dip at 2000 hertz. All of that. Talk to me about otosclerosis. So there is no ambiguity here. So we know the answer is otosclerosis. So it's a gradually progressive conductive hearing loss. In this disease, we see Gerhardt's notch. What is Schwartz sign? This can come to you as an image-based question, where you see flamingo pink appearance of the promontory seen through an intact tympanic membrane. And when you get such an image, it indicates to you that there is an active otosclerotic disease. These patients present to you with a phenomenon which is called as para-acousis Wills-eye, where the patient hears better in noisy environment as compared to silent environment. It is autosomal dominant. This has come as a MCQ prior. What is the inheritance? Autosomal dominant, recessive, X-linked dominant or recessive. So you know that it is autosomal dominant. There is a syndrome associated with which is called as Van der Hoof syndrome. What is Van der Hoof syndrome? It is otosclerosis, blue sclera, and osteogenesis imperfecta. So if this is there, then you should also be able to diagnose it. What is the medical treatment? You can give hearing aid. If the patient does not want hearing aid and is having active disease, you can give sodium fluoride. And if the patient does not want sodium fluoride, then you can go for stapedectomy and stepidotomy. You can choose one of them, but if you are asked which is the surgery of choice, then choose stepidotomy instead of stapedectomy, where you make the hole in the foot plate instead of removing the entire stapes. Okay. So that was your revision MCQ and revision of otosclerosis. All of that is done. We have already discussed Gerhardt's note, so I'm not discussing that. Which test helps evaluation of unilateral vestibular hypofunction in patients with Meniere's disease? Head impulse test, caloric testing, Romberg's testing, Dix-Hellpike maneuver. So if a patient has bilateral otosclerosis, you will see which ear is having more. Like if right ear is having 50 decibel hearing loss, left ear is having 30 decibel hearing loss, you will operate on the worst ear first, which is the right ear, having more hearing loss. You will wait for 6 months to 1 year and then you will do the surgery on the opposite ear. Okay. So whenever we are trying to assess the vestibular hypofunction, we want to assess the inner ear status. So Dix-Hellpike test will not be the case because Dix-Hellpike test is a test done for BPPV. Itna to malum hai to wo to that is ruled out. Romberg's test again tells you about the spinal tract. It is not for your vestibular test. Now, head impulse test and caloric test both can be done. But if you had to choose one over the other, both will tell you that there is a vestibular hypofunction or not. But if you had to choose one, it is going to be your caloric test. What is caloric test? We have read this before. In the external auditory canal, we will irrigate with warm water or cold water. When we irrigate warm water and cold water, will the thermal currents go to the middle ear? And now will the thermal current stimulate your lateral semicircular canal? From the lateral semicircular canal, impulses will go to superior vestibular nerve. From the superior vestibular nerve to the vestibular nerve. From there to the vestibular nucleus. From there to the medial longitudinal fasciculus. This contains third, fourth, sixth nerve nucleus, and this will cause nystagmus in the eye because third, fourth, and sixth supply the extraocular muscles of the eye. So here, when we are testing, we are doing vestibular testing and we are getting an ocular reflex. We call it as vestibulo-ocular reflex. In Meniere's disease, what is happening in the canals and in the inner ear? The pressure is increasing. So if the pressure of the endolymph is increasing, will the canal be responsive as much as it is before it is diseased? Right? So in such a condition, you will not get an optimal amount of nystagmus. So if you think that you want to assess the condition hypofunctioning of the inner ear, then you're going to do the caloric testing. Now you'll tell, ma'am, pressure बढ़ गया है, so we should be able to get hyperactive. You should get nystagmus. You're telling hypofunction. What does that mean, ma'am? There should be hyperfunction now. Why are you telling hypo in Meniere's? Because in Meniere's early phase, there will be hyperactivity. But eventually, because of chronic progression in the disease, because of chronic increase in the endolymphatic pressure, the receptors will get destroyed. एक बार हुआ, दो बार हुआ, that is ठीक है. That is starting part of the disease, there will be hyperactivity. But as you go through the phases of disease and if the patient does not take this treatment, hyper becomes hypo. So now this patient probably did not take the treatment and now the patient is in hypofunction. I hope everyone's clear about this. Okay, अभी तो caloric testing के बारे में बात किया. Can you all tell me what is fistula test? Fistula test is based on what? It is based upon pressure. If the test is positive, what does that indicate? If the test is positive, it indicates communication between which two compartments? It indicates communication between middle ear and inner ear. At what level? At the oval window, at the level of round window, or at the level of lateral semicircular canal. And if fistula test is negative, then there is no communication between middle ear and inner ear. Okay? I hope all of you got this. The test is done. We're doing the discussion of the test. Maybe you can listen to the discussion and maybe attempt the test later and get out marks, right? It's no problem at all. This is all a practice test. If you haven't done it, it's still fine. Continue with the session right now. Or if you want to do the test, the recorded version will be available for you. So you can watch the discussion later as well. The choice is to you. And Dix-Hallpike test is the investigation of choice for which condition? It is the investigation of choice for diagnosing BPPV. Okay? Yes, false positive. False positive is there is no communication, but the test is positive. Then we call it as false positive fistula test, and it is also called as Henny-Bird sign. And this is seen in which condition? This is seen in syphilis, congenital syphilis. And in some patients of Meniere's disease also. Mostly in syphilis and some patients with Meniere's disease also. Yes, head impulse test, Avichal. So what do we do in head impulse test? We ask the patient to fixate the eye on an object. It could be pen, it could be finger. Examiner is placing something in the front of the patient like a pen or a finger, and then the patient is supposed to fixate the eye on that object. Or if not, the patient examiner can tell, look at my tip of the nose. The patient is looking at the tip of the examiner's nose. Now we will turn the head suddenly. So suddenly to the right or suddenly to the left. If the eye is still focusing on the examiner's nose, there is no problem. So I moved and the eye is still there. It means head impulse test is negative. If I will move the head, there is deviation of eye to the opposite side and then it returns, that it means that head impulse test is positive. Again, it is seen in conditions like labyrinthitis, vestibular neuritis, where this test is positive. So this test is usually positive in which two conditions? Labyrinthitis and vestibular neuritis. और हमने कौन सा कंडीशन के लिए पढ़ा था? Meniere. So I said head impulse and caloric both will test the inner ear function, but इस कंडीशन में Meniere's में हम caloric यूज करेंगे over head impulse test. Got it, everyone? So assessment of labyrinth और inner ear भी हो गया. हमने head impulse समझ लिया, caloric समझ लिया, fistula समझ लिया, Dix-Hallpike समझ लिया. These are the most important ones. वो भी हो गया. Okay, so thank you everyone.